Hello, this is Anthony Pensa, and this is the Love of Wisdom podcast. I'm your host, and here at this podcast, I'll be covering information on philosophy and the importance of philosophy in our daily lives. This podcast is used to instruct and apply practical wisdom from philosophy to students, intellectuals, professors, institutions, and the average man, person, woman who's working on their daily life, who just wants to find meaning and purpose to what they're doing, aside from just living. You can find me on Instagram at the Love of Wisdom 424, Facebook at the Love of Wisdom, and please subscribe to my YouTube channel below and ring the bell at the Love of Wisdom, and please follow me on Twitter at the Love of Wisdom as well. Today's podcast focuses on one particular philosopher who lived during the late 16th century, whose name was Thomas Hobbes. He wrote one famous book, which some people are familiar with, called the Leviathan, or The Matter, Form, or Power of a Commonwealth, Ecclesiastical and Civil. In his book, he covers many topics and ranges from such as physics, matter, form, power, the commonwealth of individuals, religion, economics, power, etc. But one particular interesting perspective that I like to cover is his view on power. Now, his book was written during the Civil War in the late 1588 when it was written, and Thomas Hobbes had developed this work with the belief that in our world there is an obsession with power, right? There's the idea that power under a sovereign rule, a ruler, a king, is used and is dictating between the society which we live in. He analyzed the depths of power such that he says human beings seek to understand and control power, but the most of it is negative and should be harnessed for good, the negative power that's been used in society. He was born in 1588 and he lived to the age of 91. He published many books during his lifetime. His father was considered incompetent and unlettered, and he was born in Westorden near Malmesbury. And Thomas Hobbes, he received a Bachelor's of Arts 5 years later after attending Oxford and Magdalen Hall in England at the age of 14 by a Glover of Malmesbury, England, his educator. He became a tutor soon after to the son of William Cavendish, the Earl of Devonshire. He read Greek and Roman poets, historians, philosophers, and he was keen to one particular Greek philosopher whose name was Thucydides. His ideas and his notion of being down to earth. His view that men could learn from history how to bear themselves prudently in the present and providently towards the future, compared to what he was reading in Oxford about Aristotle and about other philosophers. He viewed a connection between the certainty of geometry with current moral and political theories at the time, creating one known work known as the Elements of Law, Natural and Political, and Politic. He took mathematics and applied it to the philosophical moral conditions and natural states of things, using these ideas to talk about the motions of men relative one to another and deduce what kind of government these men must enable them to maintain and maximize their motion. Hobbes went from a classical humanist to a mechanical philosopher, dealing with his political commitment unchanged. And in 1666, a bill against atheism and profaneness was introduced, after a great plague, creating his famous work, The Leviathan. What I want to focus on in this particular podcast is the issue that I think is related to the 21st century today, and that's the idea of power. And what I mean by power is the power structure and dynamics in our society that deal with the capitalism itself, where power is centered around money and the use of money to influence and monitor people on a local, state, federal, and global scale. What I mean by local community level, what I mean by state is the state level that we live in the United States or around the world. The federal level, I mean the governments that we have, and the global scale, which I mean is the overall arcing global economies and markets that we live in. And I like to focus on the individual people who are at risk of the power dynamics, explain a little bit about their role, and find a solution to the problems of the government, usage of the power in which they use in the societies in which they live in around the world. Now, first, before I start, I like to mention that by no means do I condemn the actions, certain actions of the government. By that I mean the representations of the government for freedoms that exist around the world. I don't entirely condone capitalism. Because of capitalism, it's important that we have economies and markets in the world, and I don't condone many of the actions and ideas that have been used in our society that cause problems for some people but not for others. Throughout the United States, and all around the world. With that aside, I'd also like to give a non-partisan, non-biased opinion on the viewpoints that I think are outdated from Thomas Hobbes' works, and reevaluate them and apply them to the 21st century as a means of claiming purpose and truth for people today who live. Now, Thomas Hobbes, he lived in the late 16th century, and during that time period, like I mentioned before, there was a civil war that had ensued. From this, he examined the government in which he lived in England and throughout the UK, different parts, and his involvement in his life from his experiences. He developed the Leviathan, and from that he had published it in London secretly, sending a copy to Paris to a fugitive named Charles II. He was labeled as a heretic by many and an assailant to the Catholic papacy. What's interesting about his particular work is that he defines two particular postulates of human nature. And what I mean by human nature, I mean what considers us as human beings, what creates our value. The first being that there's a long chain of reasoning that results from a physiological postulate through social observations that exist within human beings, that men are necessarily engaged in an insistent struggle for power over others. Second, he says, is that every man shuns what is evil, but chiefly the chiefest of natural evils, which is death, and to this, by a certain impulsion of nature, no less than whereby a stone moves downward. Power exists, according to Hobbes, from a sovereign state, a state of which individuals are subordinate to one another, to a state in which people themselves are put in a position to where they are used by the government, used by other people to portray, or to function, or just to live into society in the state. And there's an idea of a power struggle that exists according to Hobbes, a sovereign state, a state which individuals subordinate themselves into accepting, one in which considers that men are considered appetitive beings, beings that are solely designed to seek experiences according to their appetites, according to their senses, like other animals innately, given that we are, in essence, an animal being that was created, a state of men in which sees some incommodity or another, in the greatest form, is existing as the government that can possibly affect human beings, and respect of the miseries and horrible calamities that can result from civil war. In the Leviathan, Thomas Hobbes speaks about man living according to the five senses. He describes in great detail the usage of the five senses in his chapters 1 through 4. In chapters 5, he speaks about reason and science. Reason for Hobbes, it exists in what he calls is adding and subtracting of consequences, or the general names agreed upon, right? The marking, signifying of our thoughts. The only way we can come to reason is if we look at the total consequences. We add or we give, and we take away or subtract what it is that substantiates reason, right? Reason itself is always right reason the way we look at it, right? It's constituted by nature. It's used in debates, political debates, social debates, economic debates, where men think themselves wiser than the others, he says. Clamor and demand right reason and judgment, that men seek out to reason by their own means. Men reason to use for trumping, overcoming obstacles on occasion, and they use it against people for all various types. Everyone you come across around the world. Capitalism, particularly, I like to mention, it uses the notion of gain, of power, right? You work hard, you work 40 years at this job, you work an 8-to-5 job, you get that paycheck, you come home, wow, you're satisfied, fulfilled. You chase this dream, you chase this money, you chase this desire to one day be like your boss or the CEO of your company. Things that men hold dear, things of possessions of their own hands, things that are viewed as methods of power through their own individual reasoning are used to control others. Okay, reason must be used in a method of using the certainty of affirmations and negations, in which grounds reason. It cannot be just from a sum or truth of one or few consequences that are remote from the first definitions settled in significant names. People, because of the ignorance of such causes and rules, make men not fare their way. People rely on false rules, false assumptions, false ideas. They rely on causes that they aspire to, right, that are contrary to some nature. He says his famous quote, he says that reason is the pace, increase of science the way, and the benefit of manland the end. What does that mean? It means we use reason to pace ourselves. We increase our society and our knowledge through science, the way to which we can go there, and the benefit of manland, right? Man, the way we see things, is the end to which we achieve. When it comes to power, Thomas Hobbes talks about this idea of having a natural power, and that's a power that's emanating through mind and body. We have strength, form, prudence, arts, eloquence, liberality, nobility, powers that are instrumental, that accumulated by man, the greatest human powers that are united and consented in one natural or civil power, depending on individual will. When we consider the various topics he reaches into and covers, talk about the Bible, the senses, physics, laws, government, etc., one particular idea I want to focus on very well, like I said earlier, was a power. Power that Thomas Hobbes talks about that stems from human nature. We all as individuals, we live in a society. We seek recognition. We seek peers recognition. We see the dynamics of power that are influencing our government, influencing our people to what we desire, whether it be through the pen or the sword that we use to achieve things, whether it be through dirt, trash, whatever it is that we used as our income, whatever we use to generate our wealth and generate ourselves as an individual. Everything we do, from whether we buy groceries, to whether we commute on the freeway, to the cars we drive, to the work we go to, right? To the people that we interact with, to the world that we live in, to the things that we think of, things that we write, the things that we do, all the activities that we have on a daily basis. When we're clocking out for work, when we're hanging out with our colleagues, possibly our friends, business relationships, traveling, right? There's a whole list of daily activities that we'd use to signify power that's used throughout the world. Power that's exchanged, that's both physical and mental in nature. It constitutes rulers and it constitutes subjects. And that's what I want to talk about. What does it mean to be ruler and a subject? Well, ruler is those who rule over other people. Think about kings and queens who rule over other subjects in the 14th, 13th century, even prior to that. Ancient Babylonian tribes of people. We talk about nations around the world that have had rulers, that have had laws, that have had, right, tribesmen, etc. And then we have subjects, those people who fall under obligation of those people who are being ruled, whether they agree or disagree upon it. If you're not financially independent, living in the 21st century, living in America or wherever you're living, for example, I live in the United States, and for us in the United States, it always has to do with materialism. It has to do with particularly financial wealth and gain. Without financial wealth, you cannot achieve, you cannot go, you cannot travel, you cannot do the things that you want to do. If you don't believe me, wherever you live, quit your job, see how long you can survive on your own in this world without the assistance of other people. Let's see how far you can go and live. We all need people in this life. What we need to realize is that power is very influential. People use power to express many forms of desires. Nobility, goods, riches, right? We use power conjoined with the liberality, reputation, popularity, form, and the sciences to create our society, to influence people, to use it to our own means as individuals, to access the world. In the modern technological society that we live in, right, power brings influence, recognition, money, material possessions, anything that we want in this world that's coupled with money. Money itself is power. We use it intrinsically and we use it outside of ourselves, extrinsically, more extrinsically, to shape the actions that are perceived from us, from our experiences. We use science from an early age to compete against other primates, ancestors, people that we could come across with, children, anyone that doesn't have any moral intellectual training from our parents. We use these things to influence our world. Given this, men, I believe, and this is contrary to Thomas Hobbes, says that men are inherently evil by nature. They're selfish, whether it's in society, or we isolate these people from society, or we keep them in society. According to Hobbes, there's three quarrels that exist between men. The first, he says, is competition. The second, he says, is diffidence. And the third is glory. Competition, it makes men invade for gain. Diffidence is used for the safety, and glory for reputation, right? Glory, reputation. In order to achieve these things, for that, right, we use competition, diffidence, and glory to use for different means. First, we use competition through originally the usage of violence. In our society, we can see the world, the United States, a lot of places were constituted through physical, mental, and emotional violence. Excuse me, I just need to do something really quickly. Because of this, we have a world that we live in, a society which is influenced by the reality of the world around us, okay? So we live in a society that's been changed and altered through how we perceive our world, our value of the world, how we see the world, how we view society, how we see things. Because of this, what we have to consider is that there are means in which we as individuals have to look at the world. So when we see the world, when we see our society, when we see people, we oftentimes don't realize that there's a situation in which we need people, we need individuals, we need to look and see what it is that constitutes us. Forgive me for that. I just had to charge my laptop. I had to use that. So to continue where I was, we look at the world and we look at individuals in society and we look at people. And we see that there's both physical, mental, and emotional means to master other individuals in our society. You have wives, children, our livelihood. All these things are influenced by us, by those who are ruling power, And when we see that, we see there's experiences that individuals intrinsically see as good, that are shaped by certain actions. That given the experiences that we are as human beings, according to Thomas Hobbes, we're evil by nature. We use these things as a means of manipulation. Competition makes men invade gain. Diffidence, like I said, is used for safety, and then glory for reputation. These are important to really think about because people don't really perceive these ideas and concepts in their day-to-day basis, right? They just go on, live life, and they continue doing what they're doing without ever realizing what's the importance and value of their world and how they see things. Even though we don't live in a civil war period as Thomas Hobbes had lived in, a lot of these same ideas are permeated throughout history in our daily lives, wherever we go or do, right? We come across people who do these things and use power as a means of manipulating and regulating the world. Our own survival as a species depends on other people, many of which will manipulate us if given the opportunity. A lot of it's simply for financial gain. There's no such thing as freedom in a society that forces us to pay for food, rent, clothing, and other essentials simply for our own means of survival. If we were truly free, right, if we truly lived in a society, it would be like hunters and gatherers. We would give things and we would take things, right? We would barter. I barter for milk and you give me your cow, right? If we really had value, we don't need people that live in society. We don't need fast food workers. We don't need these things in our world, but we use them because of profitable gain, right? We're brought about into this machine, this is capitalistic driven economy and workplace where we need money for everything in life. We're not ruled by kings or queens anymore, but we're still ruled by other people, companies, institutions, and governments that are instituted to bring individuals to their knees, force them to consume and consume and consume products, merchandise, etc. Thomas Hobbes says that people live naturally. They want liberty, but people want to have dominion over other people. Okay? And people seek to escape government bodies, civil and federal laws. A lot of chaos comes, but you can reason and rationalize it with this. We can see that there's just two different types of people. There's people that want to live in a state of nature, that don't want government, that don't want people to bother them, don't want regulation. Those who are enlightened, who see reason, who want to change the world and make the world a better place. Most people think that they're enlightened, that they live in a state of, they live in a good society, a good condition. But most people live in a state of nature. They want to just do what they want to do regardless of how it treats other people, regardless of how other people feel. And I find that's terrible in this world and society. People don't care about other people. People are selfish. They're self-aware of their environment. I would just say that they're not aware, like enlightened people are, of their environment, their society, their culture, people, the global or local conditions, internal and external factors that are constituted into instilling enlightened ideas. And people seek value, meaning, purpose, and reason for themselves, but they live in this society where these things are not perpetuated. The world and the people around them are just driven by internal selfish drives and egos, and it's perpetuated and perpetuated in the world we live in. Now, who are you and where do you stand? How do you make a difference in the lives of other people, knowing that they're intrinsically selfish, people are evil, they do bad things, and even the good people who say they're not intrinsically selfish and evil, they're perpetually put in the system, put in the society where they are brought across these obstacles. I believe that we have to fight for our liberties, freedoms, and individuality in a world full of those who would like to take it away from us, right? It's almost as if there's like Thomas Hobbes says, the leviathan waiting to ravage and destroy our values and desires, hopes, dreams, and futures as individuals, right? But with that in mind, with all these ideas in consideration, I'd like to thank you for listening to the Love of Wisdom podcast. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe below to my YouTube channel, the Love of Wisdom podcast. I thank you all for listening to this podcast. Guys, I hope you guys have a great day or a great evening wherever you are in the world, and I'll be uploading another podcast. Thank you so much for listening to, and thank you for Thank you so much for listening to me at the Love of Wisdom podcast. My name is Anthony Pensa, and you guys have a great day.